Okay, let's jump straight into it. If you're dealing with real estate in Ontario, you know we've got a massive point of friction right now. It's what I call the illusion of control. Landlords and their reps will literally spend hours drafting up these supposedly ironclad lease agreements, right? They're carefully slipping in all these clauses to protect their precious properties. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. So many of those carefully crafted clauses, they're nothing more than ink on a page. They give this cozy illusion of control, but absolutely zero actual legal protection. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly which lease clauses just do not hold up in Ontario, pulling from some really critical industry insights.
All right, Section 1, the illusion of the lease. What sounds reasonable versus what is actually legal. Let's get into it.
So there's a very real tension here. We've all seen clauses put in with the best of intentions, right? Take this classic, and I mean, we hear this all the time. I want the listing to say no pets. If you're an agent, you hear this, every single day? A landlord has this beautifully renovated unit. Maybe they just put in pristine hardwood floors, so boom, they immediately want a blanket ban on animals. And honestly, it seems like a completely simple, reasonable request from a property owner. But for the purpose of this explainer, we've got to look past the request and focus on the hard reality.
And just look at the harsh contrast here. On one side, you have the landlord's totally firm expectation of banning pets. But then on the other side, you've got Ontario law. And the law dictates that no pets clauses in standard residential leases are generally just completely void and unenforceable. Like, you can write it in, both parties can sign it, shake hands, whatever, but legally, that clause basically doesn't exist.
Now, you might be wondering why this happens. Well, it all comes down to the Residential Tenancies Act. This is the absolute ultimate authority that agents, landlords, and tenants have to answer to in Ontario. The RTA lays out exactly what terms are legally permitted. And the absolute biggest takeaway here? The Act straight up overrides any contradictory agreements made between individuals. You know, our role isn't just to lease a home for top dollar, it's to protect our clients. And true protection, that starts with answering to the rule of law.
Moving on to Section 2, myth-busting, pets and deposits. We're going to break down the most common lease assumptions.
So, once a landlord actually learns they can't legally enforce that blanket ban on pets, their immediate, completely natural follow-up is almost always, okay, well then I want a $1,000 pet deposit, right? It's a quick pivot to financial protection. If they can't keep the dog out, they at least want a chunk of cash up front to cover the inevitably chewed baseboards or scratched floors. And on paper, it sounds incredibly logical.
But again, logic and the law are two very different things here. Landlords desperately want to demand damage, security, or pet deposits. But the Residential Tenancies Act explicitly forbids them. No way around it. Pet deposits are simply not legal in Ontario. And to add to that, a landlord is not allowed to ask for upfront rent beyond what the Act specifically allows. And what does it allow? Strictly the first and last month's rent. Nothing more. The whole shebang ends there.
Okay, so you're probably asking, are there literally any exceptions to this? Well, yes, actually. But they are incredibly specific. While your standard no pets clause is void, restrictions can actually hold up if they are part of a condominium's declarations. Condo bylaws operate under completely different parameters, so they actually can enforce pet rules. The other rare exception is if there are legitimate documented health and safety restrictions. So this is exactly why reviewing those condo declarations and bylaws is an absolute must before you even think about drafting a lease. And just to really hammer home exactly how far tenant protections extend in Ontario, check out this surprising fact. Let's say a tenant moves in, totally pet-free. 6 months later, they go out and adopt a golden retriever. Even if the landlord is absolutely furious about it, the law clearly states that acquiring a pet after moving in is not grounds for eviction. The futility of trying to legally ban that adorable dog is very, very real. That alone is absolutely not going to get a tenant kicked out.
All right, Section 3, unenforceable rules and fees. Basically, the don'ts of lease drafting.
Let's expand our myth-busting to some of the other everyday clauses that landlords just love to include but that are actually completely void. Here's a huge one: mandatory professional cleaning versus normal cleanliness expectations. So many leases demand that the tenant hire professional cleaners and maybe even provide a receipt for it when they move out, but the law says otherwise. You cannot legally force them to hire a professional service. You can only require them to maintain standard, normal cleanliness. Yes, the tenant is absolutely responsible for keeping the place clean, but you cannot legally mandate that expensive deep clean.
We can actually group the rest of these void clauses into two major categories to make it way easier to digest. First up, illegal maintenance shifting.
This is when you see clauses trying to push all the repairs or capital maintenance onto the tenant, or maybe trying to charge tenants for normal wear and tear by creatively labeling it as damage. The second category? Illegal financial penalties. That covers writing in automatic penalties, late fees, or interest charges that simply aren't permitted under the Act.
Now let me highlight a very specific, incredibly common maintenance trap that you really need to watch out for, the $100 to $200 repair deductible. Landlords frequently toss in clauses requiring the tenant to cover the first portion of every single repair, say the first $100. The idea, of course, is to stop tenants from calling about every little loose screw. But under the Residential Tenancies Act, this is completely unenforceable. You just cannot shift the baseline cost of structural maintenance onto the tenant like that. It's a total no-go.
And then there's the whole issue of how the rent actually gets paid. Let's look at post-dated checks and pre-authorized debits. The critical difference you gotta understand here is between what is requested versus what is required. Look, landlords can absolutely ask a tenant for post-dated checks or to set up a pre-authorized debit. No problem there. However, they cannot mandate these payment methods as a hard condition of the tenancy. If the tenant says, hey, I want to pay by e-transfer or just write a standard check every month, they are legally entitled to do exactly that.
Which brings us to Section 4, Building a Solid Lease. The dues for landlords and representatives. It's time to actually empower you with a concrete checklist. Because here is the exact step-by-step procedure to craft an ironclad legal lease. Step 1. Educate the client before the property is even listed. You gotta have these tough conversations early on. Step 2. Literally just use the Ontario Standard Lease for most residential tenancies. It's specifically designed to keep everyone compliant. Step 3. Review those condo declarations and bylaws, just like we talked about earlier. And finally, Step 4. Include only lawful clauses. We're talking about outlining agreed terms for things like utility payments, smoking restrictions where they apply, and basic occupancy provisions. It's also super vital to clearly establish the legal division of responsibilities right out of the gate. So the landlord has a duty. Maintenance and repairs are generally on them. But the tenant also has a duty. They are responsible for basic cleanliness and for any damage that goes beyond normal wear and tear, whether caused by them or their guests. But listen closely. Normal wear and tear is quite literally just the cost of doing business as a landlord. You cannot legally bill the tenant for it.
Let's do a super quick touch on key deposits too. Because general security deposits are illegal, sometimes you'll see landlords try to sort of sneak security money in through the back door by demanding this massively excessive key deposit, like asking $500 for a standard front door key. Yeah, the law catches this. Key or fob deposits are allowed, but they must be strictly limited to the actual replacement cost. So they have to be reasonable, and they absolutely must be refundable.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway of this entire explainer really boils down to this one absolute rule. If a clause contradicts the law, it won't stand, regardless of what both parties agree to. It does not matter one bit if the tenant happily signs a piece of paper saying they'll pay a $1,000 pet deposit and handle all the plumbing repairs. If it violates the Residential Tenancies Act, the clause is completely 100% void. That whole illusion of control, it shatters the absolute second it hits a legal dispute.
Which brings us right to the end of our explainer, and I want to leave you with a question that you should probably be asking yourself right now whether you own property or you're renting it. Look at your own paperwork. Are the clauses in your current lease actually enforceable under Ontario law, or are you relying on agreements that are completely void? It might just be time to pull out that document tonight and give it a very close read. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning.